So in 2010, our economy was 42% dependent on tourism, and in 2017, it was 62% dependent on tourism. So in March 2020, when the pandemic hit, those impacted the most were our tourism workers. So immediate, job loss, heavy loss of income, obviously across the board. Businesses were suffering. Everybody was really struggling. So we applied to and received a grant from the U.S. Economic Development Administration to do an economic resiliency and recovery strategy for the Tahoe Basin. And thankfully, again, we did include Sierra Business Council and Truckee in that effort as part of this plan. So. Just a couple quick slides here next. Just to remind you, these are just some images of the kinds of disruption that have happened since March 2020. We've had quite a lot of ups and downs in the economy. We had a tourism influx, as you remember, when the doors started opening again, and we had a lot of backlash, folks protesting in our roundabouts. Next slide, please. And then this is just some economic charts of various things that we've all experienced. Again, it's ups and downs and much more extremes, right? We had so many visitors coming to our area and heavy, economic highs and economic lows. Each time there was a fire or smoke in our region, you'd see people not come. And then when the weather got nicer again, they would be back. And so it's just been very up and down for the last 2 years. So the Envision Tahoe effort, again, is to take this information and to help figure out what our strengths are in the region and how we can better plan for the future that is not so dependent on tourism. We don't want to see when we do the numbers again that we're 72% dependent on tourism. Tourism, however, will always be an economic driver to our region. So how do we make it sustainable, ensure that the workers in that industry have good jobs, good paying jobs, and are thriving, along with our other industries like health and wellness and our hospitals and environmental innovation and some other areas. So next slide. This is a chart of other regions that are just outside of our community, so namely Carson City, Reno, and Sacramento. You can see the bars on the bottom is Lake Tahoe, and that heavy teal bar is the tourism industry, so we're much more heavily concentrated there. The other regions, as you can see, have a more balance across different sectors of their regional economy, so they're more resilient to changes in tourism. Health services and education are also pretty large areas in those other economies. The next slide is showing, sorry, these don't come across quite as clearly to you guys, so sorry. We're all used to Zoom and seeing it right in front of our faces. And I don't have my glasses on, so even I'm struggling here, so sorry about that. But ultimately, what this slide shows is that our region is very highly educated. So we actually have a lot of college graduates and those with advanced degrees in our region. That's a positive thing when we are looking at expanding opportunities in those other sectors, like environmental innovation and health and wellness. So companies that we might want to that might want to start up here or might want to hire locally have the opportunity to do that because we have a highly educated workforce. Many of them are just not working in those jobs right now. They're working as bartenders or they're working in the tourism sector because they wanted to, like me, almost 30 years ago, come up for a winter and just snowboard and have fun. And then, they stay because they fall in love with this incredible place. So that's a positive thing that we found out during our research. Next slide is just, again, a good example of the healthcare industry and its role in our regional economy. It's about $500 million at the last time that we looked at it in terms of our $5 billion regional economy. So we think that that's a specific area that has room for growth and opportunities and good wages, as most of those jobs, again, involve higher wages and benefits. So now for the Envision Tahoe effort, basically the next slide will show you, it was about a year-long process. We went into it again with this grant from the Economic Development Administration, and we thoughtfully planned out how can we do this economic recovery and resiliency strategy inclusively, make sure that we're collaborating with businesses and community leaders, and our residents was an important part of that. So ultimately, we created a catalyst committee of regional representatives across the community. We, again, continued on our normal process of research and data gathering. We then developed strategies, again, partly based on the community input that we received. There was about 1,800 residents that completed our community survey, and we incorporated their ideas. And interestingly enough, they really matched up with the Catalyst Committee's recommendations as well. And then finally, we took those strategies, evaluated them, and completed what we call the Prosperity Playbook, which is our final economic report. So the next slide, please. We'll show you some of the other data that we have. Early in the process, in the summer, I think it was 2020, we did an economic report for the region that was done by Beacon Economics and Chris Thornburg, if you know him. And again, continued on with the data and the baseline report. Then the community input report obviously was a lot of that effort of the community survey that we did with local residents, and then finally the playbook. And all of this is on our website that you can access at any time. Next slide, please. This one again, this one's easy to see, but those tall lines are the visitor serving sectors. Again, across our region, as you can see, we're just really incredibly heavily dependent on tourism, which is susceptible, as we all know, to pandemics and fires and smoke. So I think that slide's out of order. I'll have to fix that next time. Next one, please. We are all here for the recreation. But we also know, if you guys recall, during the first recession in 2006-07, we were the first to start to feel it, right? And it's because of the discretionary spending that folks have when they come skiing and come on vacation. And we were also sort of one of the last to come out of it. So while the rest of the country was coming out of it in 2009, 2010, it took us until 2011, really, to start to get back to some of the pre-recession numbers that we had in tourism and visitation. So again, just another reason for a resiliency strategy. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Carolina. And this, again, no surprise. You've all seen this yourselves in your own homes, in the community. I think, I don't need to spend a lot of time on this. I know you have the Mountain Housing Council doing so much. I just will say that, tripling of prices in the last 9 years, average median home price at, around $1 million or so, is unaffordable for a worker in the tourism industry. So the average wage for someone in our region is about $53,000. That equates to a house that would cost about $160,000. And I can assure you that I haven't seen anything on the market in that range. That's an apartment or a condo or something that would be even remotely affordable. Even doubling that, 160 for a dual income family is still incredibly challenging to find. So the housing crisis is real. I will share that coming from South Lake Tahoe and around the rest of the lake, Truckee is so far ahead. Thank you, Tony. You guys really started getting a lot of that stuff going when you were here, and you've continued it. And then the Mountain Housing Council being such a champion for the housing initiatives. I actually am hopeful that maybe we can buy a house up here. My husband's a firefighter, so you have a nonprofit director and a firefighter. We're right in that middle range that is challenging to find. So next slide, please. The housing came up in our community survey. It was the number one thing that folks were concerned about. And again, if you think about it, the survey was done by residents, right? So it's folks who are working in the tourism industry. Honestly, it's folks who are not working in the tourism industry. We know that teachers and nurses and others are really struggling. So we see housing as economic development. It's a foundational strategy to ensuring future economic resiliency. If we have a wide range of housing opportunities for our local workforce and they can stay and work where they live and not have to commute from Reno or not have to commute from the Carson Valley to the South Shore, then we know we're going to have more of a thriving community. And to us, year-round residency is also positive for your economy. So instead of the highs and lows of, I have to make all of my money as a small business owner in July and December, you can spread out that time. You've got year-round residents who are going to the restaurants and who are spending money in the economy year-round, as opposed to just in those high months. Next slide. This is a slide of the average wages in different industries. Again, the lower wage ones there on the bottom, again, tend to be in that tourism sector. The middle range ones, again, are still, not in the range that is able to afford a house in our area. The top tier are going to be more of your professional jobs. So again, we share this because we look at it and we say we're heavily concentrated in that lower wage industry component, and what we'd like to see is more of a balance of low, middle, and high. Next slide, please. The Envision Tahoe Prosperity Playbook. This is an outline of where we ended up on the final. And then I did bring a few copies. I've got more in my car, so I can grab those if anybody really wants another copy. But they're on each of the tables, the executive summary. The full report is, hefty. But this is an outline of where we landed, again, on some foundational strategies, housing and transportation improvements, as sort of, again, the basic things that you need to do to have a thriving community. And then the 3 strategies that we have outlined to help support our economic diversification plan are advancing responsible tourism, and there's currently an effort being undertaken, the Destination Stewardship Plan that's being managed by the Visitors Authorities and TRPA and others is moving forward. So we recommended a few strategies, but we're letting that process play through. And then the other 2 are supporting business vitality and anchor employers. So your anchor employers are your hospitals, your school districts, your government agencies, supporting them and supporting local business vitality with some very specific strategies. For example, a local procurement strategy. So we've all felt supply chain issues as well over the last year. So what if our big employers in the region were actually looking locally to get the things that they needed for their businesses? And that supports, again, more local businesses providing those services to the anchor employees. So things like, it could be simple as masks, it could be other things that our hospitals and school districts need. And then last is increasing support for entrepreneurs and innovation. And that is called Tahoe Inc., and that's a new a group of entrepreneurs that have gotten started. And the first thing that they're thinking about doing is an ecosystem map. So for example, you've got Tahoe Silicon Mountain up here and Lyft and some other co-working spaces, and then there are different ones all around the lake. So there's a group that meets at Wine Glasses Bar in Incline every month, and then there's another group that meets in the South Shore, and a lot of those groups are kind of aware of each other, but they may not necessarily connect. So we're hoping to connect the dots with all of those entrepreneurs in the region. And as Chris McNamara, who was the co-chair of our Catalyst Committee, along with Placer County Supervisor Cindy Gustafson, as he always likes to say, he brought his business from San Francisco to Lake Tahoe. So he's got an it's called Outdoor Gear Lab and Tech Gear Lab. And it's a technology company. He brought his company to South Lake Tahoe because he was couch surfing every weekend while working in the Bay Area and coming up here and realized there's no reason I need to be driving back and forth every weekend. I'm just going to bring my company up here. He's got, again, it's a technology company, so he's got a lot of workers in his shop right now that, again, he pays them house buying wage jobs. They all get to recreate. They've got this lifestyle. And he said, I don't think enough people know about this. Why don't more people know that Tahoe Truckee is the place where you can start up a business and hire great employees and have this quality of life that we're all in, maybe now more so with COVID, wanting that work-life balance even more. So he's a great ambassador for this Tahoe Inc. effort. And you can find out more. The next slide is our website. And the next slide is, if you want to, the next one, sorry, Carolina. Yeah, that one. So September 7th, we're hosting the Tahoe Economic Summit, and Chris will be there, Chris Mack, who I just talked about. He's going to be leading the Tahoe Inc. effort. We're going to be doing an ideas mixer where we're bringing folks together to just network and talk about the playbook and the strategies that they like, that they don't like, that other ideas that maybe we missed. We're really we're really wanting to be as inclusive as we can and hear from everybody. But what we've done is we've brought in the regional directors for the U.S. Small Business Administration and the U.S. Economic Development Administration. So these are our two Western regional directors. And so they will be here in person with their staff, and they'll also be hosting tables where they're going to be talking about opportunities. So the EDA is often talking about economic grants for governments and businesses. The SBA works with our Sierra Business Council, SBDC, very closely. They've got lots and lots of programs for small businesses. And again, we want to ensure that we are being responsive to the community and helping to acquire, these resources for our region as we look at growing the health and wellness sector or the environmental innovation sector. So we think these two speakers are going to be incredibly valuable to the region. So, and I know Jeff is a sponsor and Tahoe Mountain Realty, so anyone else is welcome to be a sponsor as well. But you can get your tickets and everything on our website and find out. And last slide is just my email. And thank you for your time this morning. Okay, hopefully that was okay. I was like, it's been a while. Thanks.
Anybody have any questions? Here, hold on.
Yeah, Heidi, did your group spend much time looking at quotas or caps? The concept of we only have so much capacity. I know it gets real contentious in that concept. So can you just summarize what came out of that kind of discussion?
We did not actually look at that, but I can tell you that the Destination Stewardship Group is doing that right now. So they are actually looking at the carrying capacity of our region. And our research shows that we get about 15 million visitors into the Tahoe Truckee area every year. So to put that in perspective, I always like to say, we have about 55,000 residents in the basin. And we go from 55,000 residents who live here year-round to about 250,000 people on the weekend. So one of the highlights from our Envision Tahoe report that we made was that we are considered rural, infrastructure-wise, transportation funding, all sorts of things, the way the government tends to give funding to communities. So they look at us as very rural because they look at our year-round population. But in fact, we're an urban community when you think about it. And so we've been sharing that message with our senators and assembly folks and congressional folks, and it's starting to be heard. So I think between those two things, between ultimately deciding what our carrying capacity is for Tahoe without ruining this beautiful place that we all love, and ensuring that the funders and others look at our area as urban. I mean, it's urban Friday through Sunday. It's rural Monday through Thursday, and it was such an aha moment for us in that planning effort that we realized we need to be thinking more like that. So, good question.
Anyone else? No? Are there any in Zoom, Carolina? No, okay. Thank you.
Oh, that was easy. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks again, Heidi, from the Tahoe Prosperity Center. All right, up next, we have Ephraim Shorts of Odette Mortgage Group, and he's been a partner and mortgage consultant with Odette for more than 17 years. So he's going to provide us some insight on how our current economic events are affecting the mortgage market and perhaps compare and contrast them to the previous mortgage market. So thank you, Ephraim. So welcome him.
Thank you, Raven. Good morning, Ephraim Schwartz, Odette Mortgage Group. Thanks for having me, and nice to see you all. So I was sitting around trying to think about something newsworthy to talk about, and a couple things started to come to mind, and then I got Lynn's email that I had to fit this all into an hour and 20 minutes, so we better jump into it. So what I'd like to do today is kind of just, I thought what was most poignant would be to maybe debunk some of the myths about what these Fed rate hikes are actually doing to mortgage rates and some of the market mechanics there, explain a little bit about inflation and how that will impact mortgage rates going forward, and then also to just kind of compare the mortgage market's role in the Great Recession, 2008 through 2011, versus what we're kind of seeing in the current economic kind of slowdown a bit, because I think that the Great Recession is conjuring up a lot of memories, and we're getting a lot of questions about the similarities or differences. So I'd like to begin by kind of boring you with a little bit of some of the mechanics about how some of this stuff works, and then that'll really help us tie in what we're seeing happen in the news every day and what this all means going forward. Fed rate hikes, right? When the Fed hikes rates, they're hiking the Fed funds rate. This is not mortgage rates. Fed funds rate is tied to short-term consumer debt like credit cards, auto loans, stuff like that. Mortgage rates are based on mortgage bonds. For conforming loans, they follow a Fannie Mae mortgage-backed security. For jumbo loans, they follow the 10-year Treasury. When bond prices go up, corresponding rates and yields come down. So what determines mortgage rates is simply the supply and demand for bond prices, right? Like anything else, the price of anything else in the world, supply and demand. So the leading factors that typically determine bond prices are generally, I would say, you can kind of classify them into four things. Inflation, if the Fed is being a buyer or seller of bonds, kind of ebb and flow between stocks and bonds, and then geopolitical events. So let me quickly chat about each of those. So inflation is really the arch enemy of bond prices, because when you think about what a bond is, it's just a fixed rate of return investment. And so when inflation heats up, people sell bonds, right? The Fed's bond purchase program, this is also known as quantitative easing. The Fed does not get to just set mortgage rates, but the way they can put their thumb on the scale is coming in and being a buyer of bonds and creating artificial demand in the bond space. That pushes bond prices up and brings mortgage rates down. The other two, stocks and bonds kind of competing for the same investment dollar, that can be a factor. And then geopolitical events. Anytime there are geopolitical events, foreign credit crisis, anything that would force foreign investment capital to look for safe parking and money, U.S. bonds and treasuries have historically been the world's safest parking for money. When we really look at what have been the driving factors over the last couple of years, it's the first two, inflation and the Fed's bond purchase program. So let's talk about inflation and CPI. And I'd like to kind of explain a little bit of a dance that goes on between CPI report and each Fed meeting. CPI, Consumer Price Index, is the Fed and the market's favorite measure of inflation, right? And for most of my adult life, CPI has been pretty tame. And the Fed's target has always been between 0 to 2%. CPI last report is 9.1, just put in perspective where things are. The Fed hikes rates to fight inflation, right? That's what the Fed rate hike is intended to do. So those are kind of some of the mechanics behind all that. Now let's talk about what has driven rates over the last couple of years. And I'll really tie this then into what we're seeing happen over just the last couple of months and what to expect going forward. So why were mortgage rates in the 2s and 3% over the last couple of years? One word answer, and that's, well, it's not one word, but there's one answer, and that's the Fed's bond purchase program. The Fed was spending about $120 billion a month throughout COVID buying bonds, creating artificial demand in the bond space, pushing bond prices up, and bringing rates down. Earlier this year, mortgage rates started moving up, and it happened on a dime the day the Fed announced they were going to begin tapering their bond purchase program, meaning just decreasing the amount of money they were going to be spending on bonds and eventually start providing supply and selling bonds. So rates started kind of ticking up, and that really allowed bond prices to just return to being determined by more normal economic factors, namely inflation. And at the same time, we're starting to see inflation heat up, right? Supply chain issues, fuel prices, this massive amount of freshly printed dollars that have just been infused into the economy. All of these things are inflationary. And it's really, since that day the Fed announced they're going to taper the bond purchase program and inflation starts heating up, that we see mortgage rates start gradually ticking up. So now I'd really like to pull us into just kind of the last few months and kind of talk and hopefully this will really make sense with CPI and the Fed meetings. So if I can take you back to that Fed meeting in June, so just before two Fed rate hikes ago, setting the stage for that Fed meeting, the four prior CPI reports were 7.9, 8.5, 8.3. And going into that next CPI report, there was kind of some cautious optimism that maybe inflation had peaked, right? Went 7.9, 8.5, 8.3. Everybody's waiting, okay, what's going to happen? And the next one, that next CPI report came in at 8.6. That was a shocker. Bond market didn't like it at all. Bond prices plummeted. Mortgage rates moved up. And when I say crash or plummeted, put it into context, mortgage rates moved up over the course of a few days, maybe 0.5%, maybe a bit more. The following week, in response to that high CPI report, the Fed came out, and this is the June Fed meeting, the Fed hiked 75 basis points instead of 50. They did this to fight inflation. And I was surprised, stunned to see all of the news articles that were just blasted everywhere the public was reading about basically the Fed just hiked the Fed funds rate and mortgage rates and housing just got more expensive for every American. When actually the opposite was true. When the Fed did that 75 basis point rate hike, mortgage rates actually came back down and we recovered most of the lost ground from the prior week's CPI report. So just to explain what happens there, the higher CPI report, higher than expected inflation, that pushed mortgage rates up. Fed coming in and hiking rates more than expected because the bond market perceives this to be the Fed getting really serious about, okay, we're not going to tolerate this inflation. We've got to bring this down. Fed hikes 75 basis points to the Fed funds rate. Mortgage rates actually came back down. Meanwhile, the public is reading articles that really indicate kind of the opposite. So now jump to July. There was the next CPI report. I think I personally created more buildup about this CPI report than talking to Jeff and everybody else. I'm like, pull up, get your popcorn. This next CPI report is maybe going to be one of the most important economic reports of my life. This is it. Really hope it's low, right? And it comes in at 9.1. Highest we've seen since December of 1981, over 40 years. And there was a moment, I think Jeff texted me in the morning, and the bond market's response was a little bit of a nothing burger. And here's why. So when that CPI report came in at 9.1, if you really dig into the report, they also released core inflation. And core inflation is CPI stripping out food and energy. And core inflation was actually lower. And so when you see CPI higher, but core inflation's lower, that indicts really food and energy, which is, food is impacted by oil prices. That indicted oil prices as the main culprit, right? But that CPI report came out on a Wednesday. It was the Thursday and Friday that week before where we saw oil come down from like 120 something dollars a barrel to the 90s. So I think the bond market's response to that CPI report was, 9.1, not good. But core inflation tells us the main culprit is oil, and we just saw oil come down and some of this data lags. So we're just going to kind of chill and maintain this cautious optimism that things are going to get better and inflation's going to come down a little bit, right? And then the Fed comes out, of course, in July and hikes 75 basis points again. And, so when you look at those June and July Fed meetings, we saw two 75 basis point rate hikes. So the Fed funds rate since early June has gone up a full 1.5%. And if you look at mortgage rates today versus prior to that June report, they're about the same and actually a hair better. Because in that July report, Fed Chairman Powell's commentary was, the Fed is not going to tolerate inflation. We are going to do everything it takes to bring it down. We're going to, hike rates, and inflation, our target is to get it back to 4% by 2024, and we think we're going to be able to do that. And I think the market understands that of all the things that are core to inflation, or most inflationary, there's a few that the Fed can't really control. Oil prices probably being the big one. And so the fact that oil prices have come down has kind of opened the door to some optimism there at the market's thinking, okay, maybe we're going to, even though that last report was 9.1, this could come down. So what to look for going forward? The Fed is not buying bonds. They'll probably do it again someday, but it's going to be a while. I think, in terms of political capital, however you want to explain it, they just, they can't print more money right now. They just printed a lot. And so the Fed's not going to be printing money to buy more bonds. And the big thing to keep your eye on is inflation. As we all know, that's the big story right now. And so, in this July report, Fed Chairman Powell essentially said the Fed with their rate hikes have reached kind of rate neutrality, and that future Fed rate hikes would be data dependent, meaning they're not making any promises. They're going to wait and see where future data comes out, and we'll see. Well, Friday we had a jobs report. Jobs report this last Friday was a bit of a shocker, in that about twice as many jobs were created as had been expected. And so, yes, you can kind of read into all those and look at how much of that was kind of part-time jobs, but generally the message was best labor market in 50 years. The economy, in terms of the labor market, is doing quite well. I think I want to get, be very careful. I think that with everything that's going on in the world, it's probably as difficult a time as ever to get into prognosticating what the economy or anything's going to look like in the near future. But I think what this will do is really embolden the Fed, because the Fed's kind of balance is they want to hike rates to fight inflation, but they also don't want to be the reason or perceived as the reason that they're causing a recession. And hiking Fed funds rate and rates on short-term consumer debt can do that. The strong jobs report could very well embolden the Fed, that they believe essentially that the economy can handle those future rate hikes. And and the other big one is let's just kind of cross our fingers and hope that oil hangs out where it is. I think we're just under $90 a barrel right now. So just to kind of put some of this all in context, I think that we've all I think the general public, everybody's become a bit accustomed to this really kind of secular, what feels like a secular low rate environment. But if you were to ask most economists, I would say they would agree that 30-year fixed rates in the 4, 5s, or 6s is kind of a normal place for them to be in a healthy, balanced economy. Since 1971, when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac began tracking this data, 30-year fixed mortgage rates have dipped below 4% twice. Both times, it was shortly after the Fed's bond purchase program. It was after the Great Recession and right after COVID. So as we kind of talk about, how much might rates come back down, what's the possibility we see them in the 2s or the 3s again? Again, not predicting the future, but when we look at history and the mechanics of how all this works, it has never happened unless the Fed is really creating artificial demand in the bond space. And I just don't see how that's going to happen in the short term. Not going to happen. So inflation is the big one, right? And I would say, just to kind of back up again, inflation, we're watching oil. Fed's not going to be a buyer of bonds. And, if the Fed continues to aggressively hike rates to fight inflation, and they feel like the job market is allowing them to do that without causing a recession, possibility, what we see in the months ahead is the Fed continuing to hike the Fed funds rate. We might even see mortgage rates improve a hair. Today, we're right around 5%. You can get into the high 4s, low 5s. And I would say what might be a possibility is rates kind of hang out in that range, and we see actually relative stabilization relative to what we've seen, the volatility we've seen over the last 8 months, and that rates kind of hang out in that 4s to 5s, and I'd be surprised if they go back down into the 3s without the Fed's bond purchase program. Next big date to have on your calendar: pull up a bucket of popcorn and see it. Tomorrow, we get another CPI report. This will be a big one. Maybe the most important economic report of my adult life. No, but it really will, this really will matter. So keep that, tomorrow's CPI report will be a big one. And then I would like to just kind of talk a little bit about the mortgage market's role in what happened to the economy overall and housing prices in the Great Recession versus today. And, you know, we're getting questions about this and people asking, the housing market going to crash again? And it's understandable, right? We've got a period of, you know, rapid appreciation and prices running up, then a kind of, you know, pretty quick economic slowdown, and, you know, people know, oh gosh, you know, this was, if it looks, walks, talks, and smells like a bubble, it's a bubble, and, you know, prices are going to crash and come down. But the mortgage market's role in this is really significant. And so if you look at the decade leading up to the Great Recession versus the last decade, prior to 2008, you could get a mortgage with no down payment, you didn't need a job, you could do stated income, you could get, with your stated income, you're just making how much you made, making up how much you made. Debt to income ratios could go to 65%. You could do not only an interest-only loan, but a negatively amortizing loan where you're making less than the interest-only payment and the interest is getting added to your principal. And when rates, when rates of appreciation are, you know, hitting 10%, yeah, I know there was a lot of talk about, you know, people, that was an irresponsible thing for people to do, buy you know, property. But if, you know, you pick strawberries for a living and somebody offers you the business opportunity or investment opportunity of buying a house for zero down payment while it's appreciating at 10%, it's not surprising people took that. And then when there was a correction and people either had the end of their interest-only period, the end of their negatively amortizing period, or there was just some relatively minor correction and prices softened a little bit. Then all of a sudden you had people who were underwater, and yes, there were distressed sales, but there was also a lot of strategic defaults. And distressed sales is what I kind of want to make the point about here. Now, the last decade, to get a mortgage, you have to, most people have had to put 20% down. Credit score requirements are more strict. You actually have to have a job, very rigorous process in scrutinizing income. Debt to income ratios on jumbo loans cap at 43%. You've got to have extensive post-close liquidity reserves. And so the big thing is people have jobs and they also have equity. And so, you know, if you look at somebody who bought a home just 2 years ago, and they had to put down 20%, and property, you know, and rate of appreciation has been, you know, 20 to 25% annually. Most people, I mean, if you bought a home just 2 or 3 years ago, you might have 40% equity in your property. People have bought homes 7 years ago, you know, there's 60, 70% equity. You're not going to see strategic defaults. Even if people do lose their jobs, if they're one of the folks that, despite the strong labor market, they lose their job, not going to walk away from that kind of equity. You're going to take a second or third job. You're going to take a night job. You're going to drive an Uber. You're going to do whatever it takes. And if you do sell your property, it's not going to be in that same kind of distress sale manner. So I think that is maybe the most important point to make. You know, whether or not we're going to see home prices crash. I mean, we're certainly seeing things soften, which is good. Jeff used the term normalization, and I know that, you know, a lot of times it just feels people are tapped into the momentum, right? Which direction are we moving? We went from the most extreme version of this insane seller's market to just a little bit more normal, and you know, hopefully this is a good thing, allowing more locals to hopefully get in it and be homeowners, because I think that as we all know, in mountain towns, locals being able to own their homes and control their own housing destiny is vital for the community. That's it.
Wow.
Any questions?
Wow, that was awesome. Questions. He covered a lot there. Thank you. Questions. Everybody's absorbing it. We
think
kind
he
of
was
got
asleep.
the highs and lows and be worried or not, or I kind of got that. Okay. Thanks, Efren.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ephraim. Appreciate it. And he's with Odette Mortgage. If you want to learn or take out a mortgage, very, very informative. Thank you. Actually, I do have a question really quick while I've got you. Is there a perceived rate increase that just relative to whatever the rate is, let's say it's 2% or 4% or 13%, that the increase will deter potential buyers that are in that particular market at that time from purchasing? Was it a 0.25% or just
so that people online or on Zoom can hear the answer? Well, I would say no. There's not necessarily just a fixed rate movement, but to put a little bit in the context how it affects affordability. If you look at a 30-year fixed mortgage and assume 20% down, a 1% increase in the interest rate is the equivalent of a 10% increase in the purchase price. And that is, not to the penny, but really, really close with respect to both monthly payments and total cost of ownership over the life of the loan. So, that hopefully that puts in a little bit of context. And then the other thing that you just reminded me to mention is, again, since 1971, when Freddie Mac began tracking this data, if you look at the average interest rate since 1971, it's in the low 8%. And of course, that's skewed in the 80s when it was in the teens, but I would argue that it's also been skewed for the last decade when we've had things in the 3s. So I think there's an adjustment happening, people getting used to where things are, but they're still relatively low, and yeah.
What do you think is like the balance with the market, like rates and housing prices? Like I see a lot of price cuts on houses because the rates went up. Is it still balanced?
I think Jeff will be able to answer this better than I.
Okay.
I'm gonna let Jeff get into that. I know that there is this rule of thumb that people will often say, ask me, well, as soon as rates go up, home prices are going to come down. Affordability is affected, but I think at the end of the day, home prices are probably just based on supply and demand. But I'm gonna maybe.
That's a good segue into Jeff.
Exactly.
Thanks again, Ephraim. All right, next up we have Jeff Brown. He is a broker owner of Tahoe Mountain Realty and the leading brokerage in the communities of North Star, Grays Crossing, and Old Greenwood, with significant market share in Martis Camp, LaHontan, and Lake Tahoe. And Jeff is going to share his expert insight into the changes in activity he's seen in the real estate market and answer some questions that are out there pending. All right, Jeff, take it. Appreciate it.
Well, good morning, and thank you for the perfect setup. I think Ephraim did really set that up perfectly in that, so much of the conversation around what is the real estate market has to do with momentum as opposed to an objective truth as to good or bad, right? Because what we're seeing right now is really eerily normal, right? In the context of, a wider span of time, decades-long span of time. It has certainly cooled relative to where we've been over the last couple of years. But to put into context what we've seen over the last couple of years, if we did see a price erosion proportionate to what happened in the Great Recession, right, which was housing caused, about a 40% regression, the median price in the area would fall back where it was in June of 2020. That's it, right? From an affordability perspective. And I would venture to say most people, we're sitting here in June of 2020 saying, wow, I have a lot of equity, right, in my property. I would also venture to say that most people who bought in, the last 26 months since that moment had a pretty good idea that they were making an irrational purchase, right? That they were not buying based upon speculation that they were going to be sitting on a pile of equity at the end of, whatever the utility of the home was going to be. So the point being, not a lot of distress out there in the market. And then to answer the question relative to interest rates and affordability, for better or for worse, because we are dealing so heavily in second homes and our consumers are so wealthy, particularly at this moment in time, we really aren't that driven by interest rates. And so the threat of interest rates going up has had almost no impact on affordability in our area. That's a commentary as much as anything to Heidi's point as to affordability. We are so far away from it, so far away from it, that even if we did have that proportionate, reduction in values, which we're not going to have, there still would not be affordability for the rank and file worker in the area. So, separate issues. To speak to, what we really are seeing right now, this normalizing of times, there's been visibility as to this coming for about 6 months, right? Even though we're now realizing it. And one of the reasons, we don't have a whiz-bang PowerPoint presentation on this is that it would just show the skyrocketing metrics of the last couple of years, where we're really just seeing the metric, the data coming in now as to what's happening. But the irrationality that we've seen in the post-COVID times has been out of the market for a while. Now, that's not to say that demand has been out, but it's just the insanity, right? The frothiness. We've still been seeing multiple bids and that sort of thing, but it's more, the sellers have been able to call the shots more in terms of the terms themselves than the pricing, right? You're still getting bids above ask and that sort of thing, and we have for a little while, but it's not quite, as frothy. And that is a function of, as opposed to 8 consumers bidding on every home, it's 4, right? Well, you only need 2 to drive it up fundamentally. But also asking prices. The asking prices have been insane, right, over that period of time. And so there's only so much, resiliency and elasticity that's out there. To talk a little bit, the story of the last couple of years has been the absence of supply. A little bit of a misnomer in that we've, still sold a ton of units over that period of time. So there is supply. I think the actual story is absorption, right? That things come and go so rapidly over that period of time that there's no lingering supply. And so what we've seen for really, the last 2 years is about 100 units on the market at any given time. Well, that's about a month of inventory. That is nothing. I would say that balance in our market is about 6 months. And that's over a long span of time. And in the luxury segments, which you used to say was $1 million and above, now it's considerably higher. It was about a year. You'd take a listing in North Star or Lahontan in one of these places, and you'd say, well, it may take about a year to get you $2.5 million or whatever that number is going to be. So at 100 units, that is, you really can't quantify how little that is. At some point, there's always going to be some amount of detritus in the market, right? The person who's asking, $2 million for a starter home in Hurstdale, that sort of thing, right? There's always going to be some number of those that are out there in the market. Well, I think we can finally quantify that's about 100 units, right? That's about what was hanging out there. So what we're seeing now is that number is about 400. There's about 400 residential units on the market right now. Historically, extremely little. In fact, just a year ago, when we were saying that things are crazy, that number was about 600, right? And so to say that, the conditions have changed materially, well, they have from January, but in a historical context, it's still quite busy. So, that gives us about 3 months of supply that are hanging out there right now. Well, that still really dramatically favors the seller. And while we are seeing price reductions, I think, I go back to what our visibility was 6 months ago. What we could foresee is, again, to take a normal year, whatever the generic year is in Tahoe Truckee real estate, most supply comes on the market between the end of ski season and 4th of July. It generally peaks about Memorial Day, right? Which I think most of us know is sort of a fake holiday in this area. It's when homeowners come up and put out their patio furniture, but it's not a big time for real estate sales, certainly in tourism in general in our market. But it is when homeowners, particularly second homeowners, will evaluate the utility of this property. How much am I actually using it? How much deferred maintenance do I have coming out of winter? And often at the end of, whatever that 5, 10, 20-year cycle is, they're done. We didn't ski as much this year. Perhaps it wasn't a great winter, or our lives have just taken us in a different direction and it's time to come on the market, right? And so it was very predictable that we would get a ton of inventory this year, right? This Memorial Day 2022, we were going to see a ton, and that's a very technical term, of inventory coming on. What was also predictable was that the asking prices would be astronomical, right? Because you were going to see people who saw the continued momentum, or thought they did, in the marketplace, plus a little floater at the top of the opportunistic sellers who thought that they were going to be cashing out and just kind of missed the memo, right, by 90 days or 6 months. And that's exactly what happened. We just saw a huge load of inventory come on during that period of time. And so to the extent that we're seeing price reductions now, that's just sanity coming into the market. That is far, far, far from a falling market right now. I mean, that is truly just a regression to the mean in terms of where asking prices will settle out. And by the way, I think it's also real sellers revealing themselves, as opposed to these opportunistic few, who are just out there in case they can get the largest number. But in the same way that, again, we're generally talking about second home buyers here, or sellers. That second home buyer doesn't need this purchase, so they're going to be maybe a little more judicious about it. That second home seller generally doesn't need the liquidity, right? To Ephraim's point, there is no distress in the marketplace right now. Everybody's sitting on a pile of equity, so rather than cut and run or panic sell, these sellers are going to be pretty patient. Even those who would have been short-term renters as an alternative, who may now not have the opportunity based upon a, STR permit or whatever the case may be, are generally pretty patient. They're willing to ride this out. And so what isn't happening, and generally never happens in our market, is that a seller will accept 10 or 15% below ask offer. Instead, they will make these slow and steady incremental price drops, where we'll see deals trade at, more or less 1 to 3% below the asking price. That's kind of the signal from the seller that's out there, as opposed to, we see this coming and we need to make this major, major correction. So in terms of what we're going to see, again, in that normal year, whatever it is, the buying season would just be starting right about now. Again, we have sort of these interesting cycles to our market where inventory season happened, right, up until the 4th of July. Well, the period of time we're in right now, we sort of call the retail or window shopping season, right? This is touring time. This is when you go open doors and look around. The agent's role is the Uber driver, right, to try to figure out which Davos we're supposed to turn on and open the door. And then deal making season starts at Labor Day. And so the actual transactions will peak September, October, and even the early part of November. And again, what it's starting to feel like is this is a pretty normal year. Particularly, relative to Ephraim's comments with stable-ish, not spiking interest rates, which are, a relatively minor factor in our market. It really feels like we're going to have a pretty normal season. And so the absence of over-leverage, of speculation, all of that gives me general confidence that we're not going to see pricing erosion, right? We may see some regressing to the mean, and that would probably be pretty healthy in our market. But something macro, something very, very macro would have to happen in order to see a regression proportionate to what we saw 15 years ago out there in the market. So what are the risk factors? And what are the slow spots in the market right now? Well, dirt is dead right now. And that's a really, really fascinating equation in that, when we're talking about that, we're generally talking about someone who would build a custom home in a resort community, right? A beautiful second home, probably, right? The reason it's dead has really very little to do with what the home is going to be worth at the end, right? What it has to do with is what it's going to cost to build, right? And that number has risen faster than appreciation and much faster even than inflation. And so, what it's going to cost to build is just so much more than what the home is worth. That's where we're seeing a little bit of breaking. But even more than that is that it's going to take about 3 years from the time someone buys the home to when they can occupy. And that could be 30% of the life of the asset for the consumer. And again, our consumers are buying for this period of time, generally second homes. That's too long. That's too much to ask. This is much more of an instant gratification sort of a purchase for these people. So there's one lot pending in the various resort communities around the Martis Valley region right now. Kind of a staggering statistic. Yet, unlike 15 years ago, because there's no over leveraging, there's very little price erosion that's happening. Sellers are generally holding still, which is in stark opposition to 2004 when Graves Crossing was launched and Bank of America was offering 95% lot loans. Every jerk in Truckee was getting one of those loans and thinking that they were going to be sitting on $1 million in equity eventually in that particular asset. So, again, I think the theme of what's happening in the market right now is remarkable normalcy, and we'll see how that plays out. I could come back with a very different comment in a month, but.
Very good. Questions? Heidi, do you have one? Here.
Both of those were so interesting, especially now that I'm, potentially trying to buy. But so the dirt is dead issue, we have so many projects right now that are in the works for affordable housing and missing middle housing. How is that impacting those projects? And is there anything we can do to, again, help support that, make sure that those don't get lost in this, cost going crazy with building and stuff?
Right. Well, it seems like those projects are generally subsidized some way, that there's some incentive, some economic incentive to the developer beyond just what it's going to be worth at market rate at the end of it. And so I think, continuing to ensure that those funding sources are available is the critical piece, because it's not supply and demand. If it truly is just supply and demand at the end of the day, then they're going to be second homes too.
Oh, hold on.
Pardon my ignorance, but I am a first-time home buyer. I'm trying to buy, and I heard that getting a loan for dirt a lot is much more difficult than getting a loan for actual house as a first-time home buyer. But so I'm looking on your insight on that.
Yeah, probably time for me to throw it back to Ephraim, but lot loans are a very rare commodity.
So really, since the Great Recession, lot loans and construction loans have been, they almost went extinct and then didn't really come back to market the way you'd think they should have. It's been really since 2009 since we've had our bank good construction loans. From a straight product standpoint, the best lot loan out there is U.S. Bank Direct. I would say, I don't know, in terms of how difficult they are, they generally want 20% down, and then debt to income ratios are probably 45%. So they're obtainable, and there are some other. I think some of the Plumas Bank might do them, but I would start with U.S. Bank if looking for a lot loan.
Oh, hold on. Tony has one.
Maybe I expand a little bit. So if you're planning to build a house and buy dirt, there's a couple of ways you can do it, right? You can buy a lot loan. You can use a lot loan to buy the dirt and then go through plans, permitting, et cetera, which is how most people do it. It makes sense given the time required and capital investment to get get plans and permits in place. And then you go get a construction loan. There are products out there where you can do it all at once, but you're not really going to have the plans and permits in place before you want to make the offer on the property. So you do the lot loan, then you go get your plans, permits, all of that in place. And when you put down the 20%, that's just straight on the value of the lot. And then if you're going to build a property, they'll want to see like 20% equity in that overall project. And so they'll look at, you'll submit plans, permits, cost of materials breakdown. An appraiser will look at those plans and give you a hypothetical future appraised value, and they'll want to see, and then they'll use that future value to determine what that what your 20% requirement is for the cash infusion and equity in the property.
This is for Jeff. Thinking about not the upper level resort neighborhoods that your firm specializes in, but the next tier down, Tahoe, Glenshire, Sierra Meadows. The second home buyers that are looking in those neighborhoods, how important is, in your opinion, the short-term rental investment opportunity to those purchasers? And my interest, quite frankly, is that's the neighborhoods we need to be targeting for our locals, and whatever we can do to stabilize and make those prices more related to local incomes, I think the better off for our community, overall. Just looking for your insight there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with your thesis. I think the answer to the question is not very. I think second home purchasers generally, what we see is 100% of them ask about short-term rentals and what sort of revenue they can yield, and maybe a quarter of them actually do it. And so to the extent, and so what we saw very little of, even in the frothiest moments, is the pure investor buyer. Somebody that bought only to be able to rent, be a landlord on whether on a short or a long-term basis. We just see very, very little of that. And so the alternative isn't to put more supply on the market. The alternative is a more traditional second home that sits vacant in those periods of time. So not a major driver, but also still pretty strong economic times. I think it would take a pretty meaningful downturn, whether in housing or just broadly a recession, in order to really change that.
I'm looking at a question here. Have you seen any change in professional investor behavior in the past few months?
I guess that's the same answer, in that the professional investor has not been a meaningful part of this market. There are certainly outliers, but generally utility, the opportunity to use and enjoy a home for some number of nights per year, whether that's 10 or 365, is the driver in the market. We generally have not seen professional investors, and while what they can yield, what they could have yield or can yield with a permit is considerable, they're going to do better buying a warehouse in Stockton than they are a second home in Tahoe.
So as a first-time homeowner or trying to buy a home, if you go the lot way, you're not going to receive those benefits of going through the FHA loans, correct?
Correct. FHA is for existing.
Yes. And then as far as I know, Town of Truckee doesn't have any type of assistance with building your own home as part of the workforce community.
None that I'm aware of.
Okay, I think that's our time. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks again, Jeff Brown of Tahoe Mountain Realty. And now we are going to open it up for stump speeches. Do we have any stump speeches? Lynn?
I do. I have a couple from Rory. Tahoe Truckee Media will be live streaming the 26th annual Lake Tahoe Summit that will take place at Sand Harbor on August 16th, and that'll happen at 10 a.m. They are also kicking off the football season with live coverage of the Truckee varsity game at Colfax on August 19th. And you can get more details on their website at tahoetruckeemedia.org. And for the Chamber, I want to make an announcement about our annual awards event happening September 9th. It's right outside an airport hangar. It's beautiful, beautiful scenery. 5:30 to 7:30. It's the one time a year when we bring together the business community. We recognize excellence, innovation, entrepreneurship with 7 of our businesses or individuals. And so it's a great opportunity to get together once a year with your fellow business peers and celebrate Truckee and recognize some excellence in our community. So you can find out more at truckeeawards.com.
Yeah, really good time. Last year was the first time we've done it outside at the airport hangars, and it was a good casual event, good to mix with businesses and listen to a band. And yeah, so come on out. Any stub speeches? Yes, Jan. Oh, sorry, got his hand up first.
This is more of an announcement. August 12th is the deadline for candidates wanting to file for local office. My understanding is a number of incumbents in the school board special districts are choosing not to run again. So everyone here and watching is concerned about our community. If they're also willing to put in the time and effort, I encourage them to take a look at the school board and any of the other special districts. Because many incumbents won't be running, it'll probably be extended for those particular districts. The deadline probably will be extended to August 15th, but I encourage people who want to be more involved to take a look.
Get involved like that man right there. Look, he has his name up there. So
Absolutely.
You too could be special.
The town website actually has, Judy Price, town clerk, has put together a huge spreadsheet of all the offices or all the special districts and opportunities, open seats, and what kind of time commitment and all of that. So go to the town website and you can learn more.
If you'd like to learn more about our new library efforts for Truckee, we're going to have a Let's Talk Library Up presentation Tuesday in the Adjunct Building right next to the library at 5:30 p.m. It's about a 45-minute presentation, and learn why this is so important to our community.
Thank you, Friends of the Library.
Very much. Yep. Any others?
One back here, Lynn.
One, okay.
Hi, I'm Heather. I'm the North Lake Tahoe Program Manager with SOS Outreach. And I did want to today let everyone know that we are in the process of recruiting volunteers for our upcoming winter season. We are a youth development nonprofit, and we do outdoor-based mentoring with local youth. So if you or know anybody who would make a wonderful mentor, loves to ski or snowboard, enjoys working with youth, I am happy to share my contact information, and I would love to share more about what we do.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great program. Kathleen, did you have your hand up back there? No? All right.
Okay.
Okay, without
Raffle.
further ado, well, there's a Zoom hand up. Good eye.
Carolina, is there a question there in chat?
We've got a hand up on Zoom.
Hi, it's Julia Tolan with the Truckee North Tahoe Transportation Management Association.
Go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to let everyone know that summer service with TART is still happening, and with that is the TART Connect program in Truckee. If anyone hasn't taken it yet, you should definitely give it a try. It's a pilot program, so we need everyone to give it a try right now so that if you like it, it keeps going. And you can find more information on that on the TahoeTruckeeTransit.com website or by downloading the TART Connect app. So get out and use the summer services with TART. There's so many of them. They connect to the North Shore. It's all free, and it's a great service. Thank
you. All right, so now we're going to do the raffle, and the only way you can win a raffle is if you're in person. So for those of you out there online, come in person, and you get to mix with the people that are in the room, which are all very important and good people, except Jim. All right, we're going to start with the Wild Cherries gift card for $10, and that is 952971. All right. Continuing our trend of stump speeches winning cards. Now we got to get presenters here. All right, next up is a Bear coffee mug and a return ticket to Good Morning Truckee. That will go to 952970. Whoa! All right. Look at that. Okay. A double winner. Better mix these up a little bit here. Okay, Grizzly Menswear, local men's store down in the Raleigh Shopping Center, run by Ruth's daughter. $25 gift card, and that is going to 952967. All right, there we go. Pays to present. And finally, and this is a good one, this is one admission ticket to the Chamber Annual Awards. That's happening at the Truckee Airport that we just spoke about. This is a $40 value, and it is going to 952968. All right, there we go. And that concludes Good Morning Truckee. Thanks everybody for coming out and listening. It's always a pleasure, and we'll see you next month. Thank you and take care.